sometimes like to divide the scriptures into different ages or time periods. We'll say dispensations. We know about in the time in the garden with Adam, they said that was an innocence. But then after they took of the fruit, they messed up. But the grace of God came. Then they go out of the garden, and you have another time period where you're dealing with, they call it the dispensation of conscience. I'll say it's the knowledge of good and evil, because that's what man was working on. And we see from that time, the whole world was corrupt. And God had to start all over with 8, starting with Noah. Then we get to that portion after the flood. We have Noah, which is they call human government. But Noah fell asleep on the job. But God still yet recovered. And then we go to a very special one I want to talk about today is promise. When he called out Abraham, he made promises to them. And that went all the way for a while until we get to Egypt. It's when they let go of the promise. And so we know that the scriptures was given for us for our learning. So I want to take a look to see what happened when we start letting go of the promises and the effects that it has. Because of the promise, we'll know that in Egypt, Israel was in Goshen. That was the good land. They had the best of the land. They had all that they needed. And actually, God was still fulfilling the promise through them, because the promise he made to Abraham was his, make your family grow and multiply on the earth. So in Goshen, that's what Israel were doing. If we look at Exodus chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them." So God was fulfilling the promise, and he gave them a good land, and they had all that they needed. But then we have a king that arose in Egypt in verse 8, who knew not Joseph. And he said something in verse 9. It says, "And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal with them wisely, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when they fall out of any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramesses." Now, when we look at Exodus, we can see that it's kind of, I call it a picture book. There's a lot of pictures and types. Egypt is a picture of the world, and Pharaoh is a picture of the ruler of the world. Israel is a picture of God's children. And we see here that the Pharaoh, or the ruler of the world, says, "Come, let us deal with them wisely." And that's what the ruler of this world today is, how he's dealing with God's children. He's dealing with them wisely. And it says that he put taskmasters over them. Now, the thing is that we know that Israel goes into bondage, but they didn't go into bondage forcefully. He says earlier that they were strong and mightier than them, so they couldn't forcefully do it. What actually happened was he gave them a job. He gave them jobs. We're going to build cities. And he set taskmasters over them. And how that looks like for us today is he does the same thing. He'll deal with us wisely, by giving us jobs, by getting us looking on what's out there in the world. Egypt at that time was the most wealthiest nation in the world. They actually built their wealth up from what Joseph did for them. They had a lot of wealth. The city was nice. They had, even to this day, people talk about the advancements in the medical field that Egypt had during that time. It looked very nice. It looked very luxurious. And that's what happens for us today. The world looks nice, looks luxurious. And it can slip us into it where we want to have what they have, so we go and work with them. Because Israel, they were known as shepherds. They used to take care of the flocks out in the field. But now they're building cities. So what we can see here is that how the enemy dealt with them is he got them not looking at the promise no more and looking at what's going on in the world. And they got caught up in it because of the nice areas. I usually think now, that Egypt today, I probably would compare to New York. Luxurious, great nightlife where people would think you can make a lot of money, have a nice place to stay. It looks real good. But I actually, I went to college right there in New York. Now, I'll be honest, never liked it. It stinks. Anybody who's kind of, it smells when you go there. That's the first thing you're going to use. Look. And things look nice, though. One of my mentors once told me to say, the grass is greener on the other side, or looks greener on the other side because it's fake. It's turf. And that's what it looks like in the world. But it uses that to capture us. It's one thing to go into bondage forcefully. It's another thing to walk right into it. And that's what we do. Our jobs, so we can obtain what the world has, puts us in bondage and makes us let go of the promises of God. Because we go and try to obtain what God has promised to us by our jobs. Most people use their jobs for food, clothing, shelter, and to have the nice things of the world. Well, God has already given us that. It's a promise. But we see what it looks nice. And the enemy would deal with us wisely. Give us a nice paying job. To lull us to sleep. He'll give us things that'll make life seem easier for us. I think about even now, when you think of Egypt and Israel, they were shepherds. Shepherds is a job where you're going to always be on the move, constantly moving. And as today's society, I noticed that the more we advance, the less we move. Because of the luxuries we have of society. I could talk about myself. I remember when I was in high school and middle school, I would walk about 4 miles a day just to go play basketball. Then play all day, then walk back home, hang out with my friends, then keep walking. Now, I'll be honest, I'll drive down the street to Dollar General and drive back because I have the luxury of a car. So we're not moving anymore. But God didn't intend that. We should be moving. But the luxuries that the world provides for us will lull us into bondage. We can get everything we want now in our phones. We get tired. I have to force myself to turn the page in the Bible. Because I can go to it faster on my phone. Now we don't even have to move to cook. They have DoorDash, bring it right to the door. But we don't realize that these are luxuries that are lulling us into bondage because we get attached to it. And then these things that are good, they become taskmasters over us. We become so addicted to it when the threat of it being taken away, now we're willing to do whatever to keep these luxuries. We don't realize that these things become so ingrained in us. Myself, sometimes if I leave out and I left my phone and I'm coming to prayer, I'll be thinking, I might be getting a call. Let me go back and walk back. But that's not important. But we've become so attached to these different things. But we don't realize that these luxuries have stopped us from moving, has stopped us from using these bodies, having kinetic energy. One of the first things I did when I got back here, I went and climbed up Pinnacle Mountain. I like going up there. And every time I get up there, I try to go, if I get tired, every time I think about it, I always think of that Moses went up a mountain twice. Over the age of 80, carrying 2 tablets. And brought them back down after fasting 40 days. And I can't go up there without getting out of breath and complaining. But it came from the lack of movement. We don't move because Satan is dealing with us wisely. And he's got us caught up to get the things that God has already given us. We're not ignorant of the devil's devices, but one of the things that the enemy does is he'll give you what God already has given you. Think about the garden. He told Eve that if you take of the fruit, you'll be like God. But what did God say in Genesis chapter 2? Let us make man in our image and likeness. And giving them dominion over the earth already. So how much more do you want to be like him? You're made in his image and likeness. And you have dominion. He's giving us everything that pertains to life.